Good morning, New Hope.
Good morning.
It is great to have you guys here. So I was thinking about this last week. A couple people last Sunday made a journey, and then 4 of us on Monday went down to Wilmore, Kentucky, to this unique thing God seems to be doing at Asbury University. And you might wonder to yourself, like what kind of people, take days off of work and school and drive 4.5 hours one way and like sit in a place where people are singing and you're right, because like for most of us, it's like if we were, if like 2 hours from now we're still in here, most of you guys are either sneaking out or like looking at your watches and like judging me in a very significant way, right? Like, so what kind of people do that? And just this morning, I wasn't planning to like mention this, but I was thinking about it as we were singing that song just a minute ago, where Jesus is the King of our heart, and it doesn't matter if you like make a 9-hour to and from pilgrimage and sit in a room for 6 hours like we did on Monday. Like, even as you come to church, right? Like, do you come into a place like this? Do you leave a place like this thinking, I want Jesus to be the King of my heart and the Lord of my life? Or do we maybe think that for a second as we're in a temperature-controlled room and we're singing a nice song like that with other people, and then we leave and we wrestle a little bit? I think that's a good thing for us to think about. It's a good thing for us to wrestle with today. And you don't have to have an answer yet, right? We're only in week 3 of this series where we're thinking through some of these foundational building blocks of our faith. But again, what a great question to really wrestle with. So we're in week 3 of this series called Starting Point. And the premise for the entire series is this: that faith has a starting point. Right? In fact, everything has a starting point. I've been telling you guys this every week. We have all these things on the back wall that have had starting points, and really many more things too. Almost everything has had a starting point. Week 1, I said, you had a starting point, right? Some of you were started on purpose. Others of you may have been an accident or an oops, right? But doesn't matter. We are glad that all of you are here regardless of what your starting point looked like, right? It can be easy to forget that the same thing is true about faith, but it's also, right, it's true about faith. At some point, your faith and my faith began. It had a starting point. And for most of us, it started when we were kids. Someone worked with us or worked with our parents to help us figure out a foundation or a framework for our faith. But somewhere along the line, for many people, they got to this place where they outgrew that. And there began to be this discrepancy or this growing gap between what they used to believe, right, what we used to believe, and maybe what we think we believe now as grown-ups. So your Sunday school faith, for many people, at some point, just didn't cut it under the questions and the pressures of grown-up life. And it's not like this is anyone's fault, right? Like, you didn't mean to leave your faith behind, but the distance just caused it to eventually become something that you saw more and more in the rear view mirror. For many people in this room, New Hope has been a part of this process in your life, right? Of finding faith, starting faith. For some of us, starting faith again. Maybe that's something that's happening in your life right now. This church has been a part of that, right? In a constructive way in your life. And I'm thankful for that. Actually, I feel like one of my main jobs is to make sure that this continues to be a safe place where people can come and restart their faith. For us and for others for a long time to come. So here's what we have done in this series. We really said if we were starting all over, we've asked the question, what would that need to look like? And what are some of the questions we would need to ask and answer if we really wanted to start again? What would our starting point be? And because this series kind of builds on itself and really all of the weeks kind of go together and really come together in the end, we're in week 3 now. So if you missed week 1 or week 2, this is not a problem. You can actually go on our website, newhope.rocks/messages. You can not only pick up the first 2 weeks, you can literally go back and you can watch like a decade of stuff from our church. So I know some of you are really excited. You're like, ooh, like I got a few days. No. But you can find all that stuff there. That's great. Not only does faith have a starting point, but the story of faith has a starting point. Did you know this? There's a story behind it. And it's from a long, long time ago. Faith and the story of faith has a history, but if we're being honest, a lot of us really don't care too much about history, right? When it comes to faith and it comes to God, we don't want to know about history and go way back in time to a different place, right? In our busy lives, it's more like this. It's Thursday today, and I've been talking to God and asking Him for something since Monday, right? And what I really want to know is, God, are you going to help me? Right? Are you going to show up in this? Can I actually deal with and interact with and have some kind of back and forth relationship with you? Right? Are you going to help me in this way? Are you going to help me in that relationship? Are you going to help me at work? Are you going to help me on that test or not? So tell me, and then let me kind of go on with my life. Don't tell me the history or the backstory. Actually, the idea that we don't, for many of us, know this backstory or this history from a long time ago, this is why some of us at different points in our life have walked away from faith. Because when things got difficult, you didn't know the backstory. So today we're going to go back in time a little bit, and we're going to see something incredibly important that virtually all of us at some point have wrestled with. So as you consider faith in God, listen, this will help. So here's something else that maybe you haven't thought about for a while, or maybe you haven't thought about this ever, but this is interesting. The 3 largest faith traditions claim the same starting point. Did you know this? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all have the same starting point. They all believe that there was one God, that this one God created everything, and that the first man, the first human, was Adam. Now, Islam teaches that Adam was the first man. They say he was the first Muslim, and that he was the first prophet of Allah. And then Jews, they continue with the same thing, right? Like that Adam and Eve were the first humans. Adam was the first man. That creation took place. They take that seriously. And Christians believe these things as well. But we Christians, we don't just believe in Adam because Genesis tells us about Adam, right? We primarily believe that Adam was the first man because Jesus talked about Adam. Because here's the crazy thing. We as Christians, we are crazy. We will actually believe anything anyone says if he can predict his death and resurrection and then pull it off, right? Like if he's like, hey guys, a couple weeks from now, I'm going to bite the dust, but 3 days later, I'm back, right? And then he does it. We're like, whoa. Anything this guy says, I want to pay attention to, right? Like this is sort of what we do as Christians. This is why we believe this. And all 3 of the big faith traditions believe that God created the world and his creation was good. That there was a first person, and that at some point something went wrong. That at some point somehow humanity took God's perfect creation and somehow through our own choices we messed everything up. Now, some of you may not believe in the Adam and Eve story, but most people will agree, as we talked last week, that we've kind of messed things up, right? And I pushed you a little bit on this and said, hey, it's not just that we are all mistakers, right? Like we are something more than this. Because what do you call someone who makes the same mistake over and over on purpose. We called it what it is and said that you and I are sinners. So all the faith traditions believe it started off good, and along the way, we made some decisions that messed it up. And the other thing the faith traditions believe is that after things went bad, the work of setting things right through a single man started, and this man's name was Abraham. Okay? So the three largest faith traditions claim the same starting point, and that starting point was Abraham. Now, Abraham is where everything comes together, but it's also where they head in separate directions. Islam goes one way, Judaism takes another path, and hundreds of years later, when Christianity sprouts its wings and comes on the scene, it goes a third direction. But the thing we all have in common is that we claim Abraham as our father, right? We claim Abraham as our founder. He is the place where it all starts. And that began God intersecting with history and addressing the problem of sin through this one man named Abraham. Now, that's interesting, and it's part of the history, but I don't bring it up because, again, I want you to believe Adam and Eve, right? Or even the creation account recorded in Genesis. You can figure that stuff out for yourself. I bring this up because there is a conversation that's recorded between God and Abraham that touches on a tension that you and I have all felt at some point. And this is going to be really helpful for us today. And that maybe you are feeling this tension even right now, today, based on your childhood faith. And it's linked to a question that we all ask, right? Have you ever asked this? If there is a God, how am I doing? Right? Like when God looks down, how does he see me? Where do I stand in this relationship between me and God? When I pray, does God hear my prayers? Can he do that? Does he even care what I have to say? Can I really know God, and can he really know me? Like, where do I stand with God? Anybody else besides me ever wonder this? Like, God, are we good? Are we good? Are you like, when you look down, I hope you're happy with me and you love me, but maybe sometimes I've disappointed you and you're kind of doing, how does this work? So in this conversation between Abraham and God, there's a statement that is so perplexing. I want to leave it with you this week for you to wrestle with. And it takes Abraham from more than just a character of history, and it makes him personal. It's sort of like, again, just this Abraham who was like 4,000 years ago. It's really this Abraham and you dynamic that starts to sort of crop up. Because again, when we see how God interacts with Abraham, it tells us some things about how God wants to and does interact with us. But before we look at this, I need to give you a little bit of a backdrop. Can I do that? That'll help us to grasp this. And in order for us to see this, I want to actually ask my son Christopher and my son Liam just to come stand on stage for just a minute. I'm not going to ask them to do anything or say anything. I just want you to see them. Okay, so this is my 17-year-old son Christopher, and this is my 9-year-old son Liam. All right, you guys got them in your minds? All right, thanks, fellas. That's good. And the reason I want to tell you this is because this is going to help all of us to understand the dilemma that God felt, which caused him to begin to engage with Abraham in order to make a difference. Now, parents, if you're in the room and you're a parent, you've ever been a parent, maybe you're a grandparent, whatever, have you ever been filled with terror because you saw something like this? Look at this picture. Okay, anybody? Now, actually, that's my son Christopher. 9 years ago, when he was 9, 8. Sorry, he was 8, almost 9. So he would have been almost Liam's age. So like the age Liam is now. And there he is, right? Reaching up on his tippy toes because he wants the big plastic glass on the top shelf. Strategic error as parents, right? To put the glass the kids want on the top shelf. He can't really reach it, so he's kind of up there trying to grab that. All of the cups on the middle shelf are all glass, and then on the lower shelf are plates and bowls and mugs, which are also all highly breakable. And it's like we're just waiting for the day when everything crashes. Right? Because you ever look at your shelves and see like those little plastic pins or maybe stainless steel or brass, depending on the level of your cabinets, right? But they're these tiny, like you almost need a microscope to see that they're there. And then what do? We like load 100 pounds worth of glasses on there, and then our kids reach up and kind of almost grab on them. And we're like, oh my, I'm just waiting for the day when everything falls to the ground. I thank God that the day I took that picture was not that day in the Patterson house, or that this last week was not that day in the Patterson house. And I hope that you did not have that experience in your house this week either. But let's just pretend like that did happen. And there is a terrible crash to the point where, as parents, when we hear that noise, our first thought is, did they break a glass? And then we keep hearing, and we're like, oh my gosh, did they break all of the glasses? Right? And then we kind of wonder, did they literally walk into the house with a giant box of broken glass and just start dumping it everywhere? Like, what is going on here? So as parents, what would we do? We go running to the kitchen, right? And in that picture, like seeing my 8-year-old standing barefoot with broken glass everywhere. A sea of glass. And I know for both my kids, if that ever happened, Dad, I'm sorry. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do this. Dad, I'm sorry, right? The shelf's down. All the glasses are broken. Glass everywhere. A barefoot kid in the middle of it. What do? I point my finger and I say, I can't believe you did this. You need to figure this out. You should have been more careful. And when you get your mess cleaned up, then we can talk. And I turn and I leave. Right? No. Absolutely not. Now here's the deal though. Some of you believe that is what God is like. That He sees you in a mess of your own making, right? Because of your own sinful choices, your sea of glass, and He says, there you go, figure it out. I'll be in here when you get it cleaned up, then you can call me and we can interact then, right? Even though some of you think that God is like this, you didn't believe for 1 second that I would do this, right? That I would leave my 8-year-old standing there in that glass. Which means, think about this is crazy, which means you believe that I have more compassion than God. Which means you believe I am inherently more compassionate than God, which means that kind of makes me more godly than God. And you don't have to know me very much to know that's not true at all, right? And it's not true of anybody, right? Like nobody is more godly than God, which also means there may be something about God that you don't fully know. And today I want you to see this. It's so simple, but it's so profound. So here's what I would do. This is what any father would do if their child was trapped. And trapped in a mess so big that you wouldn't even know where to begin cleaning it up, right? Like I would probably try to move some of the biggest pieces, right, to kind of get those out of the way. But not too long into this, I would carefully step and try to avoid and kind of crunch on some glass until I got to my kid, and I would pick my kid up, put him on my back, and I'd get him out of there, right? Like this is what parents do. And then what do? Have you ever had a mess that was so big that you wouldn't even know where to begin cleaning it up? Like maybe somebody got into some paint or knocked out. I remember one time I just bought a brand new gallon of paint. It was in the back end of our Subaru Outback. Somebody pulled out in front of me. I had to slam on the brakes. I hear that gallon of paint fly into one of the sides. And when I got home, I noticed that the lid had popped off the gallon. And I had one of those plastic trays, but the paint filled up the entire tray and then spilled over. And I spent hours and days cleaning and re-cleaning and re-cleaning. As long as we owned that car, it smelled like paint. Hey, have you ever had such a big mess at your house that your thought wasn't, how do we clean it up, but maybe we should just sell the house and start over, right? Like it was that big. This is similar, right? This whole idea. Humanity was so messed up and they had so polluted the world. Some people, we as people of faith are really bad at this. Oh, Rob, things are getting so bad. Oh, things have never been this bad. God's likely coming back soon. Oh my gosh, if you existed at this point in time, things were way worse than they are now. There was absolutely no law. It was really survival of the fittest and survival of the richest. So if you had power or you had wealth, you could literally do whatever you want. If there was a kid you want, you could kidnap the kid. No consequence. You could totally do that. Slavery, if you had the money or the power to be able to enslave people and make them do whatever you wanted, that was a normal thing. If you saw a woman who interested you, you could take her for your own. You could take whatever and whoever you wanted. And so here's God staring into this mess and wonders, am I going to have compassion? Am I going to wade into this sea of glass and try to start doing something about it, trying to start cleaning up this mess? Or am I just going to hang this big out of order sign on the earth and go do something somewhere else? Interesting, right? And all of the faith traditions, every one of those major three, believe that God decided to wade into humanity and that he decided to do something, and that he started with this man named Abraham. So it was about 1876 BC, almost 2,000 years before Jesus was born, when God interrupted humanity and he started fixing this mess. And to start this, he chose Abraham. And this is really interesting because, like for many of us, we might think of Abraham as this like really godly, righteous dude. But I want you to know, Abraham was a very normal human being. Okay? So he wasn't super righteous. He was actually kind of messed up. So there's a story we see in the Bible where Abraham is going through Egypt with his wife Sarah when they were much younger. So Sarah's young, she is beautiful. And remember what I said about how there was no law, and if you were rich enough or powerful enough, you could do what you want, you could take what you want. So some of Pharaoh's officials noticed Sarah and noticed her beauty, and they went back and told Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was like, right? I want her. And so because that's just how it worked. And so Abraham in his mind probably was thinking, what do I do? What do I do if my choice is my wife or my life? And so they asked him, hey, Abraham, is this your wife? And the man of God, Father Abraham, what does he say? He says, she's a little more like a sister, right? You can have her if you really want. Ouch. So if you think you have some loyalty problems or have had in your relationships or your marriage, like, you know what? Like, imagine this. So Abraham, he was totally normal, but God had to start somewhere. So he picks imperfect Abraham. And here is what he said. Here's what he said to Abraham. It's recorded in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. To where? The land I'll show you. Well, where is that? That's not part of the deal right now. That's not part of the information. So think about this. What God is asking Abraham to do is to abandon and leave your entire circumstance. How would each of us feel if God asked us to do this? Hey, listen, I need you to pack up all your stuff and just go somewhere. I'll show you. What? Leave all my people, leave my whole family, leave everything I know, and go somewhere? You're not even going to tell me where? Exactly. Right? Like a lot of times we do this, don't we? We sort of romanticize places. Oh, I want to go here. I want to move there. I'd like to go on vacation. I'd like to visit this place. And then you sort of get there and you're like, I don't know where anything is or where anyone is, and I don't really like this. I want to go back home, right? That's not what's going on here. So Abraham has no children at this point. At this point, his wife Sarah has gotten older, right? So she is really past the age of having kids. And God says, I'm going to isolate you, and I know it doesn't make any sense at all, but just trust me because I'm going to do a brand new thing. If God said that to you, what would you do, right? I know, like, if you're in a room like this and we're worshiping God and it's, like the right temperature and we're not hungry and whatever, we might go, oh, Jesus, whatever you want. But when we leave the door and it's like all sorts of difficulty and mystery and unanswered questions, for most of us, we're likely going to stay put and not do much. And then God makes 3 promises to Abraham. Here's promise number 1. He says this, I will make you into a great nation. And that came true. We know that looking at it from this side of the story, right? Like Israel says they are this great nation. All of the Arab nations say it's them, right? That they are the great nation. But nobody disagrees that many great people and nations came from Abraham, right? So think about this. In order to have a great nation, don't you have to start with a great family? So if Abraham has no kids and no heirs and no whatever, how can he become a great nation? He's old, he has no kids. So best case scenario, this is going to take a long time to happen. And he doesn't have a ton of years left. At worst, it's kind of a nice idea, but it's never really going to happen. It's sort of like if you or I had an emergency, we grabbed our phones, we called 911, right? The dispatcher answered at the police station. We're like, I got an emergency, please send the police right now. And they said, hey, good news, you're in luck. Yesterday, we just placed an order for some brand new cruisers. So after they get built and shipped and delivered to us, we will hop in them and be right over to your place. Like, not really the answer we were hoping for, right? So, but this is what's going on here. And then promise number 2 was this. God says to Abraham, I will bless you and I will make your name great. So I want to do a quick survey to sort of test this one. Who here today in the room, if you're online, you can make a comment on Facebook in the chat or whatever. Who here before today, before you came to church, before you were in this service, at some point in your life have heard about Abraham, right? Father Abraham had many sons. Pretty much all of us, right? We have all heard about Abraham even before this. So pretty much everyone. But how about this guy? Who has heard of this guy, Chedorlaomer? Okay, nobody. Nobody? He was like the famous king of Edom, right? No? Some of you were like, well, where's Edom? And it's like, well, the dirt's still there, but it doesn't even exist anymore, right? So we don't know this. So at the time of Abraham, this is so cool, nobody would have known Abraham. If you would have shown up around where Abraham lived at really any point and said, hey, where's Abraham? Nobody would have known. Nobody knew Abraham. But at this point in history, everyone would have known Chedorlaomer. So this is so interesting. God says to a nobody, I'm going to make your name great. And he says to a somebody, hey, pal, sorry. like nobody's going to remember who you are just a few generations from now. So 4,000 years later, halfway around the world, in a different language, in a different culture, almost everyone goes, oh yeah, Abraham. I know who he is, right? And then here's the third promise that God gives to Abraham. It says this, and all the people on earth will be blessed through you. All of the people groups are going to be influenced and better off, Abraham, from what I'm going to do through you. And the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians all say, oh yeah, that's because of us, right? That's because of what God has done and is doing because of us. And to this, God would say, that is my point. The world has been blessed more through Abraham than anyone, right? So yeah. But Abraham's getting old, and he still has no kids. So everything he has, and he's worked for his entire inheritance, if he doesn't have a child, it would go to his chief servant, whose name was Eleazar. And so there's this, in the scriptures, there's this recording where Abraham is basically wondering, is this actually going to happen? Because the first step hasn't even happened, right? I can't even be a great family, let alone a great nation, if I don't even have a son. So step one hasn't happened. And at this point, Abraham's kind of like, I don't even care if I turn into a great nation, because I'm not going to be around for all that. But God, are you even going to really give me a son? So he's praying about this one night in desperation. And here's what God says to him. It's recorded in Genesis 15. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, talking about his chief servant Eleazar, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And then he said this is so cool. Look at this next slide. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can even count them. Then he said, so shall your offspring be. Look up and count them if you can. We get this, right? We live in a community where there's not a ton of light pollution, and if it's a clear night, we can see stars everywhere. I grew up in an even smaller town in Canada, up in Northern Ontario, and I remember as a young kid, because we had like zero light pollution, and I would lay outside on my back on top of the picnic table and watch the northern lights dance across the sky and literally see endless stars everywhere. So God shows Abraham this picture, and he says, so shall your offspring be. There will be so many of them that it will be uncountable. Right? And I know this is hard for you to believe because you're old and your wife is old and you have no son. But believe me, right? Trust me in all this. And here's the crazy part. And this is where I think it gets personal for you and me. So I want you to watch this, right? Because it's powerful, it's personal, it's important. And this has survived now for 4,000 years since Abraham lived. And it has profound implications. For the first time ever, God states the terms of a relationship between God and humans. So if you've ever wondered, can I really know, God, can I really know that you're real? And can I really know that we can have a relationship and that you're happy with me or whatever, I'm doing well? Are there things between us? Can I know that? Is it even possible to have a relationship with you? If you have asked this, if you've ever wondered, can I know, can anyone know? And maybe for some of us, we think, well, I used to think so, but honestly, as I've gotten older, I'm just not sure anymore. This statement is so significant. It's actually where the three major faiths depart from one another. And none of them receive what God says without adding to it. Even us Christians, we don't just take what God said, we add to it and build on it. And it's so unbelievable. It's so unbelievably simple that we all think, well, That just sounds too good to be true. That can't be it. It can't be that simple. But God told us this hundreds of years before the Ten Commandments. He told us this before the law was given. This was 2,600 years before Islam. This was 200 years before Jesus. This was before Moses. Watch this. This is unbelievable. Genesis 15:6 says this, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Your faith, your belief, your trust is the one and only thing. And when you decide to trust God, this is when God says, hey, you trust me? That just made things good between us. Hey, Abraham, remember when you had no kids and I told you were going to have more descendants than the stars in the skies and you trusted me? That's what I'm talking about. Hey, remember that embarrassing incident in Egypt when you kind of were like, no, she's my sister? You know what? I'm not holding that against you. It's not about that. It's all about your trust in me, period. Nothing else. How we have historically said that around New Hope is this: Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Right? It's not that you have to trust Jesus and do 18 other things. Right? It's believing in Jesus and nothing else gets us everything. Here's another way to say it. Trusting God resulted in right standing with God. This is the first implication that humans could have a right standing with God. And everyone missed it. Everyone. The Jews missed it. The Muslims missed it. The Christians missed it, right? We all missed it. The Jews kept saying, oh, you got to become a Jew, right? That's the way. And even when Jesus showed up, right? What did they say? Well, we don't really need you because we're Abraham's kids and we have our 614 or 13 or whatever rules that we follow. So that's kind of what it is, right? So the Jews missed this. The Muslims, right, who came on the scene about 620 AD, they're basically like, hey, believe, listen to the prophets, do works and acts of righteousness. And in the end, if you've done all that stuff, then we'll evaluate and we'll see whether you get in or not. So you can't even know till the very end, and you got to cross your fingers and hope and pray. And even us Christians, we mess this up too, right? So it's the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians. 20 minutes after Jesus left, we started to argue. Well, hang on, do we got to do all the stuff the Jewish people did? And don't we, Jesus was a Jew and there's all these rules. Don't we got to follow, be Jewish too and keep the law? And then other people were like, well, I don't know. Do we have to do all that stuff too? Can't we just believe? Didn't Jesus say just believe? And so there was this argument. And to this very day, the church remains split about all this stuff. And here are the three big ones that people think. Well, God has to accept me either based on my birth, my behavior, or my belief, right? Oh, I'm born into the right family. I got the right parents. And if I'm not, maybe I'm kind of on the outside looking in. And I hope everybody has a good family that supports you and helps you grow and learn and nurtures your faith. But sometimes when we come from good families, that actually hurts us, doesn't help us, right? Because for some people, they're like, man, my grandparents had great faith and my parents had great faith. And we think that we just kind of slide in on their skirt tails, right? And that we don't have to have faith of our own. We don't have to trust God for ourselves. That's not true at all. Or other people are like, well, it has to be behavior, right? I got to do more good than bad. And if it's a lot more good, that's even better. But as long as the scales tip in my favor, then maybe that's how God lets me in. Or for some people, it's about belief. I've got to make sure my theology is as perfect as possible, because if it's not, even unintentionally, I may be left on the outside looking in. So we wonder, is it birth? Is it behavior? Is it belief? Is it a combination of those? Is it two of those? Is it all three? Is it something else altogether? Right? Because this is what God said before any of these other things or any of these other world religions even existed. Just listen to these simple words that God said. Just trust me. That was it. Just trust me. There isn't a magic formula. It's not about who your family is. It isn't about perfect behavior. It's so simple. Most people have a hard time believing it. In fact, it can be almost impossible to believe. But will you do what Abraham did? Will you believe? So here's a question. What if the starting point for a relationship with God is trust? What if that's it? It sounds so simple, right? And it is simple, but it isn't easy because life isn't like this, right? Like if you just leave the building today and you're like, I'm just going to trust that everything will work out. Does everything always work out? No, right? Oh, school isn't like this. If you're in the room and you're in school at any level, try this. Go to school tomorrow and just like sit in class and go, I'm not going to do any work. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to fill anything out. I'm not going to turn any assignments, but I'm just going to trust that my teacher's going to give me a good grade. How's that going to go? Poorly. Actually, don't do that. Well, Pastor Rob said, no, don't do that. It won't work well. Life doesn't work like this. Church doesn't even look like this, right? Because sometimes this isn't easy because of people like me. Because I'm like, guys, we should do this and we should try this and we should accomplish that. And you guys sometimes are like, yeah. And other times you're like, well, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, or I'm not willing to do that. And so you don't. And then you feel maybe guilty because maybe, just maybe, God isn't happy with me. But what if it was just this easy? Check this video out.
Jesus, I just don't trust you.
You don't trust me?
No, I mean, I want to trust you, I just don't.
I have an exercise that I think will really help you.
Oh, okay.
Stand here and face this direction. Mm-hmm. Now, do you trust me?
No, I just said I don't trust you.
All right, well, this is all part of the exercise.
Oh,
all right?
right, okay.
Whenever I ask you if you trust me, you say, yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Even though I don't.
It's practice.
Okay.
So, do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Are you gonna catch me?
Don't worry about that part.
Okay, that's the part I'm worried about.
You can do this, okay? Just trust me.
Trust you.
Fall back.
Okay, well, Jesus, I trust
Good.
you. Yes, I do trust you. I'm gonna fall
Okay.
back. Woo!
Oh, okay.
That's great.
Let's try this again. Just face this direction and keep your feet planted, all right? Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
All right.
I'm really gonna do it. Okay.
Good.
Oh, Jesus, you really caught me! I didn't think you were gonna catch me, but you did!
Oh, that was great!
That was great!
You're ready for level 2!
Level 2, here
Yes!
I come, baby! Woo! Whoa!
Okay, hold it.
Oh, you know what? You're too close. You need to move back.
Ah, right.
Okay.
This one's a little bit different, Laura.
Oh, okay.
Stand here,
Uh-huh.
but face me.
Woo! Forward fall. I can do that.
Wait.
Whoa.
Okay, wait for my signal.
Oh, right, the Jesus signal.
Yes, the Jesus signal. Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you so much.
Good. Fall back.
That's awesome.
It is awesome, especially when you do it.
Seriously?
Of course.
Okay, Jesus, I don't know if you noticed this, but there is nobody over there.
I know it looks that way to you.
It looks that way. It is that way.
You can do this, Laura. Just trust me and fall back.
Jesus, I can't do that.
We can do it together.
I can't.
You can.
I won't.
It's not easy to trust, is it? It's not easy to have faith when you feel like God has said one thing, but you look around and you have no son, and the way forward seems impossible. It's not easy to trust when your life is hard. But God says to all of us, if you will trust me, things between us are good. You're in. So here's your homework for this week. Talk about this on your ride home. Talk about this with your family. Talk about this if you're in a small group, in your small group. Which of the following things is your view, has historically been your view? Not what's your view now, not like I've convinced you during this message. I really don't want to convince you. I want you to wrestle with this. I want you to think this through and experience, right? I don't want you to be like, oh, you almost had me with that video, Rob, or the words of that closing song. Think about this. Which way expresses what you've historically believed? That God accepts me based on my birth? Right? Like I'm part of the right family. I've been around the right people. He accepts me based on my behavior, that I've got to do enough good or I'm in trouble. Right? That he accepts me based on my belief that as long as I have the right or the accurate or the correct theology, then that gets me in. Or maybe a combination of the three. Or could it be as simple as trusting God? I'm going to pray. And we're going to close with a song. And I want you to reflect on this. I want you to allow yourself to wrestle and to struggle with this. You know, like with your faith and your trust in God. What does that look like? Do you believe this? Do you live this? And so Jesus, today, I want to confess. I want to confess for me. I want to confess for all of us. We take these perfect, beautiful, simple, powerful things that you have clearly told us, and we add so much nonsense on top of them. So instead of trusting you and living a life of trust in you, God, we add all of our rules and expectations and obligations, and we just confuse everything. So God, I just want to pray for us that today and that this week, as we really wrestle with this, that you would help us to push those other things aside. Not that they're not important at some point, but God, that you would help us to begin by trusting you, even when it looks impossible. Father, help us to trust you. I ask these things today in Jesus' name. Amen.